Hello bookworms, it's Jade from Bedtime Bookworm, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here to tell you all about my favorite books from 2017. As I mentioned in my statistics video, I had 13 new-to-me books that I rated 5 stars in 2017, and I'm going to talk about all of them today. Before I get started on my 5-star reads, there are 2 books that are kind of honorable mentions because when I was looking through my Goodreads at all of my 4-star reads, these are the 2 that really stood out that I still don't think were quite 5 stars, but were really close. I've decided that I'm no longer doing half stars, but if I was, they would be 4.5 stars. My first honorable mention is An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. This is a YA fantasy that takes place in a world where Fae exists. I got a physical arc of this when I attended Y'all West last year. As a rule of thumb, I go into arcs with no expectations because a lot of times they tend to disappoint me. So I think that played a factor in how much I really enjoyed this book because it totally surprised me. It was by no means perfect, but the enjoyment that I got out of reading it helped me to look past any of its imperfections. I really enjoyed the unique world building, and honestly this book made me laugh multiple times, and that definitely added to my enjoyment of the book. My next honorable mention is Bird Box by Josh Malerman. This was really close to a 5-star read for me, but just wasn't quite there. I would classify Bird Box as an adult thriller, and it's a little bit of a post-apocalyptic story because it's set in a world where people basically no longer look outside, because when you see some mysterious thing that is outside, you go crazy and start killing people. So because of this, people don't really go outside, and even when they do go outside, they go out blindfolded. I listened to this book on audio and found it really suspenseful, and I just had a ton of fun reading this, so it was definitely one of my favorites from last year. Okay, so now on to my actual favorites of 2017. I really, for the life of me, could not put these in any sort of order. What we're gonna do is we're going to go in order of when I read them. So I started out the year with some fantastic reads, and my first 5-star read of 2017 was Poison Study by Maria V. Snyder. Poison Study is a YA fantasy about a girl, Yelena, who becomes the poison taster for this king, so she tastes his food to make sure it's not poisoned. What I really loved about Poison Study were the characters and the magic system. It was just a really gripping read. I read it in 2 days, and I was totally obsessed with it at the beginning of the year. Since then, I have read the other 2 in this trilogy, and they were definitely not as good as Poison Study. I think I gave the second one 4 stars and the last one 3 stars. It was just going downhill from the first one. But I really love the first one and is definitely a favorite for me. My next 5-star read from last year was Between Shades of Grey by Ruta Sepetys. This is a YA World War II historical fiction book, but it's actually about things that were happening with Stalin. I listened to this mostly on audio, and I absolutely love this book. I remember I was on a work trip when I was reading most of this, and I went back to my hotel and was eating takeout in my hotel room, listening to this book and just sobbing because it made me sad. I mean, it's a World War II book, so what would you expect? It was so good. I absolutely loved it, and Ruta Sepetys is one of my new favorite authors. My next 5-star read was The Demon King by Cinda Chima. This is a YA high fantasy series that I absolutely love. I've read the next 2 books in the series, and I think I gave the next 2 both 4 out of 5 stars, but I still love the series as a whole. It's a little bit of an older series, but it is so good, and if you love YA fantasy, I definitely recommend you check it out because this series is underhyped, probably because it's an older series. It's a 4-book series, so I still have the last one to read. I actually have it out from the library right now. I hauled it in my last library haul, and I think the library haul before that as well. But it's definitely a top priority book. I love the characters, I love the relationships, I love the magic system, I love the world. I love so much about this series. Definitely a favorite. My next 5-star read was The Last Magician by Lisa Maxwell. I also had an arc of this that I got from Y'all West, and again, I went into it with very mediocre expectations, and it totally blew me away. So Last Magician is a YA historical fantasy. Historical fantasy? I just made a new genre. It's a mix between historical fiction and fantasy because there's magic, but it's set in the 1920s in New York City, and it's also kind of a heist story, but there's time travel, but it's magical time travel. It's all many, many good things, and I'm definitely looking forward to reading the next book. My next 5-star reads were the first 2 books in the Gold Seer trilogy. The first book is is Walk on Earth a Stranger, and the second one is Like a River Glorious. I gave both of these books 5 out of 5 stars. If you haven't heard about this one, it's also a historical fantasy, but it's a historical fiction that is set during the Gold Rush era, and the main character has a magic ability. Her magic power is that she can sense gold in the earth, which, as you can imagine, is one, very useful, but also two, very dangerous of an ability to have during the Gold Rush. In the first book, she travels from Georgia to California, and then the second book takes place mostly like in the San Francisco area. I loved both of these. Rae Carson is a new favorite author. I need to finish this trilogy and then read her Girl of Fire and Thorns trilogy as well, because I just hear amazing things about it. Okay, so my next 5-star read was Uprooted by Naomi Novik. Uprooted is an adult fantasy standalone novel, and it's set in sort of like a Russian-inspired world, and it's about a girl, Agnieszka, who unexpectedly gets selected to work for the dragon, who is like the lord over her little town area, and about how her town and the dragon are all trying to defeat the evil force that is the woods that surround where they live. This book is very atmospheric and a little lyrical. The magic is very unstructured, which typically I wouldn't like, but it really worked for me in this book. I love the world, I love the writing, I love the characters. Definitely a favorite. My next 5-star read was The Girl with All the Gifts by MR Carey. I picked this up because I watched the movie, and I had already heard of the book before, and I knew it was like a different twist on zombies. And that's totally what it was. I watched the movie, I loved it. I read the book, I loved it. The book definitely has obviously a lot more details and stuff than the movie did, but I think for the most part it really captured what the book was trying to do. I love post-apocalyptic fiction, and I am potentially writing a zombie book one day. I got a little plot bunny in my head for it at least, and so I really liked seeing this different take on zombies, and I just found it really interesting, and I thought it was well done, and if you like zombie books, definitely check this one out. My next 5-star read of 2017 was The Troop by Nick Cutter. This book was so good. So this is an adult horror book. There are a lot of things in this book that were very hard to read, but I love being scared, so I'm all over that. So The Troop is basically about a group of Boy Scouts that gets trapped on an island when there's some sort of apocalyptic outbreak happening, and how they survive on the island. It definitely reminded me a little bit of Lord of the Flies, just because it's about boys stuck on an island and things that they have to do to survive, and things get a little messy and a little gruesome. If that plot sounded intriguing to you at all and you like horror, I would definitely recommend checking this one out. I thought it was really well done. So my next 5-star read is the one that I think might be my favorite out of all of them. Like if I had to pick just one, it's the one that I've been telling everyone is my favorite of the year. I definitely had a blast when I was reading it and had some really good conversations and thoughts about it after I read it. So not to keep you in suspense, but that book is This Mortal Coil by Emily Suvada. This Mortal Coil is a YA dystopian, post-apocalyptic sci-fi book, and it's set in a world where computer programming and genetics and genetic manipulation have kind of combined into one thing. For those of you who don't know, I have a master's degree about genetics, and so I know a lot about genetics. I also have a dabbling interest in programming and coding, so seeing those two things merged in this book was like amazing and mind-blowing. And the author, Emily Suvada, is actually some sort of scientist. I don't remember, but she has her PhD in something, and when it comes to the genetic stuff and most likely the programming stuff as well, she knows what she's talking about. So I think what was the coolest for me about this book was to see good genetic science used in this way in a world that I just found super interesting. And on top of that, this book was action nonstop, so many plot twists. If you don't like books where you feel like the rug is just being pulled out from under you constantly, then I don't know if I would recommend this, but it was a wild ride and I loved it so much. I can't wait for the next book. And then the next 5-star reads that I had in 2017 were the first 2 books in the Queen of the Tearling series. So that's The Queen of the Tearling and The Invasion of the Tearling. I listened to both of these on audio. I was so intrigued by these stories that I would just sit and listen to the audiobook while, playing on my phone or doing other random things. I would make excuses to listen to my audiobook because the plot of these books was so interesting to me. When I say that, I don't mean that it was super action-packed. It's really more of a slowly paced story, and it's a lot more character-focused than I typically like my fantasies. But if you like political intrigue, then I think you would like these books. They there are some heavier topics that are touched on and some explicit scenes. So I think it's definitely, you know, on the older end of YA. I would even consider them to be new adult, just without like that romance spin on new adult. There's definitely magic in this world, and there's also a little bit of a sci-fi twist to it as well, because this is one of those worlds that is a regressed society but set in our future. So it's got this really weird mix of like futuristic science fiction-y stuff in it, but also feels like a fantasy that's set in the medieval time period. So it's really weird and really interesting and different and unique. I really liked it. I am really excited to read the last book in the series. I hear it's a little bit polarizing. People either love the way it ends or hate the way it ends. We'll see what I think. Okay, and then that brings me to my very last favorite from 2017, and that is Salt to the Sea by Ruta Sepetys. So this is also a World War II historical fiction, but this one is about a group of people who are trying to escape into Germany. The way the story is set up, it's like 5 different point of views, I believe, with alternating chapters. One of them is actually a Nazi soldier, which was very interesting to read from. As the book progresses, these different threads intertwine. It's the story of this really big, like, maritime disaster. So this was a real thing that happened in history that I had never heard of, and I don't even remember the name of the boat right now, so that's very unhelpful. And the book is about these characters and their journey to the boat and what happens when they get to the boat and all of that. It didn't quite get me as emotional as Between Shades of Grey did. In Between Shades of Grey, you really are following one character and her family, and in this one you're following so many more characters that my emotional attachment, I think, was a little more spread out. But regardless, it was still a really touching and emotional story. Also, at the end of both of Ruta Sepetys' books, she writes a pretty lengthy author note about the people that she interviewed and why she wrote these books, and just seeing her inspiration for these stories made them just that much more meaningful to me. I really, really loved this book. If you like historical fiction, World War II historical fiction, I definitely recommend checking both of Ruta Sepetys' books out. Like I said, she's one of my new favorite authors. It was good. Okay, so those were all of my favorite reads from 2017. If you've read any of these books, or if they're on your TBR, or if you're adding them to your TBR after hearing me talk about them, then let me know down in the comment section any of your thoughts. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I post bookish videos at least once a week. That's all I have for now. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bookworms, keep reading. Bye. Me with 13 new to me books in, which leaves me blah, blah, blah. Okay, so is trying to fight off blah. This is one of my favorite videos to make. I've never made one before, so that doesn't make sense. Bye.